The late winter of 1879 descended upon the northern Minnesota frontier like a clenched, frozen fist, its icy grip tightening with each passing day. When the temperature plummeted to a bone-chilling -30 degrees Fahrenheit, Jonas Fletcher, a homesteader with calloused hands and a spirit forged in the crucible of hard work, discovered a truth every settler in the unforgiving territory dreaded. His meticulously built cabin, the supposed bastion against the elements, was failing him miserably. He had followed the sacred building codes to the letter. Rough-hewn logs, painstakingly chinked with mud and moss, a wood stove strategically placed according to the local carpenter's unwavering advice, every element chosen and assembled with the promise of creating a warm, secure haven. Yet, the biting wind snaked through every invisible gap, every minute imperfection. Ice crystals bloomed on the interior walls, delicate and beautiful, yet a stark reminder of his losing battle. He burned through 3 cords of precious wood that month, a staggering amount, just to keep his family from succumbing to the deadly cold. Across the vast, windswept plains, homesteaders and cabins identical to Fletcher's were facing the same grim reality, losing the same desperate fight against the relentless winter. Then, in a moment of quiet desperation born from necessity, Fletcher quietly implemented a technique borrowed from the whispered traditions of the old world, a concept his neighbors initially dismissed as nothing more than foolish eccentricity. It involved drawing air through a buried pipe, a seemingly ludicrous notion in the eyes of hardened frontier veterans. But that single, unconventional change brought the insidious drafts to an abrupt halt and miraculously cut his wood consumption nearly in half. Here's the story of how this buried air system worked, a testament to ingenuity and a deep understanding of the Earth's hidden secrets. And here's what every serious builder, every aspiring homesteader, needs to understand about the stable ground temperature that Jonas Fletcher rediscovered, a lesson learned through trial, error, and a refusal to surrender to the forces of nature. Jonas Fletcher had arrived in the Wind River Valley 3 winters prior, brimming with the unshakable confidence of a man intimately acquainted with timber. 20 years spent toiling in logging camps, from the towering pines of Maine to the dense forests of Wisconsin, had taught him how to read the secrets etched in wood grain, how to notch logs with unwavering precision, and how to build a cabin that would weather whatever trials nature dared to unleash. He had meticulously followed every rule laid down by the territorial guides, those Bibles of frontier construction. Select straight pine logs, 8 to 10 inches across, the heartwood strong and true. Notch them with a sharp axe, creating interlocking joints so tight they seemed almost seamless. Fill the inevitable gaps with whatever mud and moss the land offered, a desperate attempt to seal the fortress against the invading cold. And, of course, place the wood stove against the back wall, where the chimney could draw properly, ensuring the smoke escaped into the heavens rather than suffocating the inhabitants. The first winter, a mercifully mild season, had been deceptive, masking the underlying problems that lurked beneath the surface. Temperatures rarely dipped below zero, and Fletcher, lulled into a false sense of security, convinced himself that the persistent drafts swirling around his ankles were simply the unavoidable price of frontier living, a minor inconvenience to be endured with stoic resignation. But 1878 brought a harsh, brutal introduction to the true reality of northern Minnesota, a reality that would test the limits of his endurance and force him to question everything he thought he knew. Night after night, he awoke to the eerie sound of wind whistling through gaps he was certain he had sealed, gaps that seemed to widen with each passing storm. Mornings revealed intricate frost patterns etched on the interior walls, a chilling map charting every weakness in his construction, every point of vulnerability in his fragile defense. By the third winter, Fletcher understood with chilling clarity that his cabin was hemorrhaging heat faster than his faithful wood stove could possibly replace it. The mud chinking, once a seemingly impenetrable barrier, had cracked and crumbled during the previous spring's relentless freeze-thaw cycles, leaving finger-wide gaps between the logs, gaping wounds in the cabin's armor. Cold air poured through these openings with such relentless force that candles flickered uncontrollably, casting dancing shadows that mocked his efforts, and papers scattered across his rough-hewn table whenever the wind howled outside. The wooden floor, laid directly on the leveled earth, acted as a conduit, conducting the relentless cold up through his thickest boots, even when he stood directly beside the roaring stove. Most frustrating of all was the stove itself, the centerpiece of his heating strategy, the supposed solution to his frigid predicament. Fletcher had purchased a quality cast iron model from a dealer in Duluth, a reputable brand specifically designed for heating frontier cabins. Yet, the harder he pushed it, the more glaring its limitations became. When he packed the firebox full of split oak and birch, fueling the inferno with the best wood he could find, the intense heat created powerful updrafts that sucked cold air through every crack and crevice with hurricane force. The stove would glow red-hot, radiating an almost unbearable heat, while his water bucket, sitting just 6 feet away, froze solid, a cruel paradox that highlighted the futility of his efforts. On the coldest nights, he burned logs so fast that sparks and embers shot up the chimney like a dazzling, yet wasteful, fireworks display, consuming precious fuel and creating a constant fire hazard, a threat that loomed large in his mind as he fought to keep his family warm. The cabin's interior climate swung wildly between scorching heat and bone-chilling cold, offering no comfortable middle ground, no respite from the extremes. Near the stove, the air grew so hot it parched his throat, burned his eyes, and turned the small space into a stifling oven. But step toward any wall or corner, and the temperature plummeted 20 degrees, sending shivers down his spine and reminding him of the ever-present enemy lurking just inches away. His sleeping loft, accessed by a crude ladder, trapped all the smoke and superheated air, creating a suffocating atmosphere that made breathing difficult, while somehow remaining colder than the main room below, a testament to the unpredictable and unforgiving nature of heat dynamics. Fletcher often woke with a splitting headache, the result of inhaling noxious fumes all night, and with numbness creeping into his fingers and toes, a chilling reminder of the encroaching cold. Fletcher's neighbors throughout the valley faced identical struggles, enduring the same hardships and fighting the same losing battle. The Olson family, living 2 miles north, had built their cabin using the same territorial guidebook Fletcher had followed. Yet, they burned through 4 cords of wood each month, an exorbitant amount, and still sent their youngest children to sleep at relatives' homes during the worst cold snaps, a desperate measure to protect their vulnerable offspring from the potentially deadly temperatures. The McGreedy brothers, both experienced carpenters from Ohio, boasting years of experience and a reputation for skill, had constructed what everyone agreed was the finest log cabin in the region, a masterpiece of frontier craftsmanship, perfectly chinked, expertly notched, and fitted with an expensive heating stove imported all the way from Chicago. But even their meticulously built cabin suffered from the same problems of uneven heating and excessive fuel consumption that plagued every other homestead, proving that even the best conventional methods were ultimately inadequate against the fury of the Minnesota winter. What set Fletcher apart from his neighbors, what distinguished him from the rest, was his stubborn refusal to accept these conditions as inevitable, his unwavering belief that there had to be a better way. His immigrant grandfather, a man who carried the wisdom of generations in his weathered hands, had described earth-shelter homes in the old country, homes where families stayed warm through brutal winters while using half the fuel of conventional houses, homes built with an understanding of the earth's natural insulation. These stories had always seemed like folklore, quaint tales from a distant land, but as Fletcher split his 5th cord of wood that month, his axe biting deep into the frozen timber, he began reconsidering techniques he had previously dismissed as old-world superstition, techniques that might hold the key to his survival. The breakthrough came during a seemingly insignificant conversation with Henrik Larsson, a Norwegian immigrant who had arrived the previous spring, bringing with him the traditions and knowledge of his homeland. Larsson mentioned that his family's farm in Norway had drawn fresh air for their main fireplace through a stone-lined channel that ran beneath the frost line, tapping into the Earth's stable temperature. The incoming air arrived pre-warmed by contact with the relatively constant Earth temperature, reducing the thermal shock that plagued conventional fireplaces and making them far more efficient. Fletcher had never heard of such a system, But the underlying principle made immediate sense to a man who understood that the ground 6 feet down stayed remarkably warm, even when surface conditions reached deadly extremes, a stark contrast to the volatile air above. When Fletcher tentatively mentioned this unconventional idea to his closest neighbor, Samuel Wright, the response was immediate and decisive mockery. Wright, a self-proclaimed expert on all things construction and the informal authority on such matters for the entire valley, declared the concept desperate foolishness, the ramblings of a man who had burned through his common sense along with his firewood. The local carpenter, Thomas McKenna, known for his practical and no-nonsense approach, was even more blunt. "Fire heats cabins, Fletcher," he declared with unwavering conviction, "not fancy holes in the ground. You'll dig yourself into bankruptcy and still freeze come January." The skepticism extended throughout the community, a chorus of doubt echoing through the valley. At the monthly Grange meeting, a gathering of farmers and homesteaders, Fletcher's mention of underground air channels provoked open laughter from men who had built dozens of cabins using time-tested methods, men who prided themselves on their practicality and adherence to tradition. They pointed out that every successful homesteader, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, relied on the same basic approach: tight logs, good chinking, and a proper wood stove. Deviation from this proven formula struck them as the desperate act of a man who had failed to master the basics, a misguided attempt to reinvent the wheel. But Fletcher had spent too many sleepless nights feeding his ravenous stove, too many hours battling the relentless cold, to dismiss any potentially viable solution, no matter how unconventional it seemed. He had calculated, with a growing sense of dread, that at his current consumption rate, he would need to cut and split over 40 cords of wood to survive the winter, an impossible task that would leave no time for other essential work, condemning his family to starvation. More importantly, he had observed, with the keen eye of a man intimately connected to the land, that the ground beneath his cabin floor remained noticeably warmer than the air 6 inches above it, even during the coldest weather, a subtle clue that whispered of a potential solution. If the Earth could moderate the brutal temperature swings that tormented his living space, perhaps an underground air channel could deliver that same moderating effect to his heating system, taming the wild fluctuations and creating a more stable and comfortable environment. The decision to proceed, to defy the conventional wisdom and embrace the unconventional, came during a particularly brutal February night, a night when outside temperatures plummeted to a terrifying -35 degrees. Fletcher woke every hour to stoke his stove, feeding the insatiable flames, yet still watched in despair as ice crystals formed on the walls beside his bed, delicate and beautiful, yet a stark reminder of his losing battle. By morning, his body aching and his spirit weary, he had resolved to test the buried pipe system, regardless of community opinion, regardless of the ridicule he might face. He would trust his instincts, follow his convictions, and gamble on a solution that might just save him and his family from the relentless grip of the Minnesota winter. Fletcher began construction in early March of 1879, seizing the brief window of opportunity between the receding frost line and the demands of spring planting. He selected a location 30 feet east of his cabin, a spot where the ground sloped gently away from the building, ensuring proper drainage and preventing water from backing up into the pipe during heavy rains or snowmelt. The excavation proved far more challenging than Fletcher had anticipated. Minnesota's clay-heavy soil, frozen solid through the long winter months, resisted his every effort, demanding careful timing and technique. He worked during the warmest part of each day, when surface temperatures climbed above freezing, softening the top layer just enough for his spade to bite into the unyielding earth. Progress was measured in inches rather than feet as Fletcher dug a trench 18 inches wide, following the frost line down through increasingly dense clay and scattered granite stones, remnants of ancient glaciers that had shaped the landscape millennia ago. At 6 feet depth, Fletcher finally encountered the thermal boundary he sought, the point where the Earth's temperature remained relatively constant regardless of the chaotic fluctuations above. Even on days when surface temperatures hovered near freezing, the soil at this level maintained a consistent temperature of approximately 50 degrees Fahrenheit. He tested this meticulously, leaving his thermometer buried overnight and checking it each morning for a week, his heart pounding with anticipation each time. The reading never varied more than 2 degrees, confirming that he had reached the zone of thermal stability that would make his system effective, the key to unlocking the Earth's hidden warmth. Construction of the pipe itself required materials Fletcher had to source from 3 different suppliers, a testament to the challenges of frontier living and the ingenuity required to overcome them. The pipe sections were made from fired clay tiles, each 18 inches long and 6 inches in interior diameter, purchased from a pottery works in St. Paul, a considerable distance away. These tiles featured interlocking joints that could be sealed with mortar, creating an airtight passage that would not crack under the constant freeze-thaw stress that would inevitably plague any system built above ground, a critical advantage over wooden pipes. Fletcher ordered 24 sections, enough to span the distance from his excavation point to the cabin interior, with several extras set aside for potential repairs, a prudent measure in a land where setbacks were common. Laying the pipe demanded precise attention to grade and alignment, a task that required patience, skill, and an unwavering commitment to detail. Fletcher maintained a gentle downward slope from the exterior intake toward the cabin, ensuring that any moisture condensation would drain outward rather than collecting inside the system, potentially causing blockages and reducing its effectiveness. He bedded each tile section in a mixture of sand and small stones, providing stable support while allowing for slight ground movement during seasonal freezing and thawing cycles, preventing the pipe from cracking or shifting. The exterior intake required careful engineering to prevent snow blockage and animal intrusion while maintaining adequate airflow, a delicate balance that demanded careful consideration. Fletcher constructed a wooden hood, elevated 18 inches above ground level and angled to shed precipitation, protecting the opening from the elements. Beneath this hood, he installed a mesh screen, salvaged from an old window, to exclude mice and other small animals that might seek refuge from the cold and build nests in the warm pipe, potentially blocking the airflow. The intake opening measured 4 inches by 6 inches, large enough to supply adequate airflow without creating excessive wind noise during storms, a crucial consideration in a region known for its fierce and unforgiving weather. Inside the cabin, Fletcher modified his stove installation to integrate with the buried pipe system, transforming his heating setup into a sophisticated and interconnected system. He removed several floorboards directly beneath the stove and connected the pipe terminus to a simple wooden box that directed incoming air upward around the stove's base, channeling the Earth's warmth to where it was needed most. This arrangement allowed the stove's natural draft to pull fresh air through the buried pipe rather than drawing it through cracks and gaps in the cabin walls, eliminating the drafts and creating a more controlled and efficient heating process. The first test came during a cold snap in early November, a prelude to the long winter ahead, when temperatures dropped to a chilling 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Fletcher sealed every visible gap in his cabin walls with strips of cloth and wooden wedges, forcing all incoming air to pass through his buried pipe system, ensuring that the test results would be accurate and conclusive. He then built a modest fire in his stove and measured the temperature of air emerging from the pipe opening, his breath held in anticipation. The thermometer read 38 degrees Fahrenheit, more than 50 degrees warmer than the outside air temperature, a remarkable result that exceeded his wildest expectations. More importantly, Fletcher could feel the difference immediately, a palpable shift in the cabin's atmosphere. The characteristic knife-edge sensation of cold air infiltration around his ankles, a constant reminder of his losing battle, disappeared entirely. Instead of frigid drafts cutting across the floor whenever wind gusted outside, he experienced a gentle circulation of cool, but not brutal, air, a subtle breeze that felt refreshing rather than threatening. That air mixed gradually with the heated air rising from his stove, creating a more even and comfortable temperature distribution throughout the cabin. The system's performance during the winter of 1879 to 1880 exceeded Fletcher's most optimistic projections, proving that his unconventional experiment had been a resounding success. During January, when outside temperatures regularly reached a bone-chilling minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit, his pipe consistently delivered air at temperatures between 35 and 40 degrees, a testament to the Earth's remarkable ability to retain heat. This 40 to 60 degree temperature differential meant his stove no longer had to work against incoming air that could freeze water instantly, allowing it to operate far more efficiently. Fletcher's fuel consumption dropped dramatically and measurably, providing tangible proof of his system's effectiveness. Where he had previously burned 3 cords of split hardwood per month during the coldest periods, a staggering amount of labor, his consumption fell to approximately 2 cords, a remarkable 33% reduction that freed up countless hours previously spent cutting, splitting, and hauling wood. More significantly, his cabin maintained more stable interior temperatures, creating a more comfortable and livable environment for his family. Instead of wild swings between overheated areas near the stove and freezing corners, Fletcher achieved relatively even heating throughout his living space, eliminating the temperature extremes that had previously plagued his cabin. The buried pipe also eliminated the pressure differentials that had plagued his cabin during windy weather, creating a more stable and predictable indoor climate. Previously, strong winds created suction effects that pulled cold air through every available crack with tremendous force, making the cabin feel like a wind tunnel. With all incoming air channeled through the buried pipe, wind pressure at the surface could not create these uncomfortable and wasteful drafts. Fletcher documented his results with methodical precision, recording daily wood consumption, interior temperatures at morning and evening, and exterior weather conditions, transforming his cabin into a living laboratory. His log showed that on the coldest night of the winter, a night when the temperature plummeted to minus 32 degrees Fahrenheit with 20 miles per hour winds, his cabin interior never dropped below 55 degrees, despite using only half the fuel he would have required the previous year, a testament to the transformative power of his system. The success of Fletcher's system attracted attention from unexpected quarters, drawing visitors from far and wide who were eager to witness the miracle for themselves. Eric Anderson, a recent immigrant from Norway, visited in February and immediately recognized techniques his grandfather had used in Scandinavia, methods that had sustained generations through harsh winters. Anderson explained that similar earth contact heating methods had sustained Norwegian farmers through centuries of brutal winters, often in regions where timber was scarce, and every cord of fuel represented weeks of backbreaking labor. This connection to Old World knowledge lent credibility to Fletcher's innovation among settlers who might otherwise have dismissed it as desperate experimentation, bolstering his reputation and solidifying his status as a pioneer. Anderson's endorsement carried particular weight because Norwegian and Swedish immigrants had already proven themselves as some of the most successful cold-weather homesteaders in the region, known for their resilience and adaptability. By spring, Fletcher's neighbors could no longer dismiss his buried pipe as eccentric tinkering, their skepticism eroded by the undeniable evidence of his success. The evidence was undeniable. Fletcher had heated his cabin through one of the harshest winters on record while using significantly less fuel than conventional systems required, defying the conventional wisdom and proving that there was indeed a better way. Word of his success began spreading to other valleys and settlements, carried by travelers who had witnessed his comfortable cabin during the worst weather of the season, transforming him into a local legend. Fletcher's buried pipe had solved the air infiltration problem, a major victory in his battle against the elements. But the cabin envelope itself remained a thermal disaster, a significant vulnerability that needed to be addressed. Even with pre-warmed incoming air, heat poured through the walls, floor, and ceiling at an alarming rate, negating some of the benefits of his innovative heating system. On calm nights when his pipe system worked most efficiently, Fletcher could feel cold radiating from the interior surfaces of his log walls, a chilling reminder of the constant heat loss. The rough-hewn timber, dried and shrunk after 3 seasons, had opened gaps that no amount of conventional mud chinking could permanently seal, creating pathways for heat to escape and cold to infiltrate. The solution came through an unexpected teacher, a man who carried with him the wisdom of generations and the knowledge of time-tested techniques. Klaus Weber, a German immigrant who had arrived in the valley that spring, bringing with him the traditions of the Old World, visited Fletcher's cabin during a March cold spell and immediately identified the thermal weaknesses that conventional frontier building ignored. his eyes trained to spot the subtle flaws that betrayed the cabin's vulnerability. Weber had grown up in the Black Forest region, where winters lasted 6 months and fuel wood was so precious that families planned heating strategies like military campaigns, rationing every log and optimizing every BTU. His family's farmhouse had employed techniques developed over generations of cold climate survival, methods that maximized insulation and minimized heat loss. Weber explained that American settlers typically treated chinking as a simple gap filler, mixing whatever mud and moss they could gather quickly, a haphazard approach that yielded inconsistent results. In contrast, European builders created chinking that functioned as both insulation and a structural component simultaneously, a carefully crafted mixture designed to withstand the elements and provide lasting protection. The key lay in the proper mixture of clay, straw, and organic binders that created a dense, cohesive material resistant to cracking and shrinkage, a formula perfected over centuries of trial and error. Fletcher and Weber spent 2 days in April gathering materials for the improved chinking recipe, embarking on a collaborative effort that blended frontier ingenuity with old-world wisdom. They harvested clay from a deposit Fletcher had discovered while digging his buried pipe, selecting the most plastic variety that would bind effectively without excessive shrinkage, a critical element in ensuring the chinking's longevity. The straw came from wheat stubble left over from the previous harvest, cut to lengths between 2 and 4 inches for optimal interlocking, creating a strong and cohesive matrix. Weber insisted on adding chopped cattail fiber gathered from nearby wetlands, explaining that this material provided tensile strength and prevented the clay-straw mixture from separating during freeze-thaw cycles, a vital ingredient in a region where temperatures fluctuated wildly. The mixing process required precise attention to ratios and consistency, a skill that Weber had honed over years of experience. Weber demonstrated the traditional method of combining 1 part clay with 3 parts chopped straw and 1/2 part cattail fiber, adding water gradually until the mixture achieved what he called proper plasticity, a state of perfect consistency. Wet enough to pack tightly, but dry enough to hold its shape when squeezed, the mixture needed to be just right to ensure optimal performance. Fletcher learned to test the mixture by forming handfuls into balls and observing how they held together when dropped from shoulder height, a simple yet effective method for assessing its quality. Application demanded techniques unknown to most frontier builders, a departure from the haphazard methods that were commonly employed. Instead of simply stuffing the mixture into gaps between logs, Weber showed Fletcher how to remove all existing chinking and clean the log surfaces thoroughly, creating a clean slate for the new material. They then applied the new material in layers, pressing each layer firmly into contact with the wood and allowing it to set before adding the next, ensuring a strong and lasting bond. The final layer was smoothed and shaped to shed water, while maintaining continuous contact with both upper and lower logs, creating a weather-resistant seal that would stand the test of time. The clay straw chinking proved dramatically more effective than Fletcher's previous attempts at sealing his cabin, exceeding his expectations and validating Weber's expertise. Where conventional mud chinking cracked and fell out during seasonal temperature changes, the new mixture flexed and maintained its seal, adapting to the cabin's natural movements. More importantly, the thick layers provided genuine insulation rather than simply blocking airflow, creating a more effective barrier against the cold. Fletcher could feel the difference immediately when he pressed his hand against the interior wall surface, a palpable decrease in the cold radiating through the logs, a tangible improvement that made the cabin feel warmer and more comfortable. Weber's second innovation addressed heat loss through the cabin's lower walls and floor, another area of significant vulnerability. He introduced Fletcher to the Scandinavian practice of interior sod lining, a technique that added both insulation and thermal mass to the most problematic areas of the building envelope, creating a more stable and comfortable indoor climate. This method involved cutting sod blocks 18 inches long, 12 inches wide, and 6 inches thick from areas where the grass grew densest and the soil structure was most stable, selecting the best material for the job. Fletcher began the sod installation in May, working systematically around the cabin's interior perimeter, his movements precise and deliberate. He stacked the blocks, grass side inward, against the lower 3 feet of each wall, creating a continuous barrier between the log structure and the living space, a layer of natural insulation that would help retain heat. Each layer of sod blocks was fitted tightly against the next, with joints staggered like brickwork to eliminate thermal bridging, preventing heat from escaping through the seams. The grass roots and organic matter in the sod provided insulation value, trapping air and creating a thermal barrier, while the soil mass stored and released heat slowly, moderating temperature swings and creating a more stable indoor climate. Over this sod barrier, Fletcher installed a wainscot of rough pine boards salvaged from shipping crates, adding a layer of protection and aesthetic appeal. The wooden facing protected the sod from damage and moisture while creating an air gap that enhanced the insulation effect, trapping a layer of still air that further reduced heat loss. The finished installation looked neat and intentional rather than makeshift, giving Fletcher's cabin interior a more refined appearance than typical frontier dwellings, a testament to his commitment to quality and craftsmanship. The third component of Fletcher's envelope improvements involved reorganizing the cabin's interior space to conserve heated volume, a clever strategy that maximized efficiency. Weber explained that European farmhouses typically concentrated living activities in smaller, more easily heated areas during winter months, reducing the amount of space that needed to be warmed. Fletcher implemented this principle by constructing a sleeping loft above the area where his stove was located, taking advantage of the natural tendency of heated air to rise, creating a cozy and efficient sleeping space. Fletcher built the loft platform from split logs laid across substantial joists hewn from pine trees on his property, utilizing the resources at his disposal. The platform covered approximately 1/3 of the cabin's floor area, creating a cozy sleeping space 8 feet long and 6 feet wide, with just enough headroom for sitting upright. Access was provided by a sturdy ladder constructed from straight-grained oak, ensuring safe and easy access to the loft. Heavy wool curtains, hung from wooden rings, allowed Fletcher to close off the loft from the main room, trapping heated air in the smaller space during the coldest nights, creating a personal sanctuary where he and his family could escape the harsh winter. The thermal performance of these envelope improvements became apparent during Fletcher's first winter with the complete system, providing tangible evidence of their effectiveness. In December of 1879, when temperatures dropped to -28 degrees Fahrenheit, his cabin interior remained comfortable with significantly less fuel than even his improved buried pipe system had required the previous year. A remarkable achievement. His daily wood consumption averaged just over 1 cord per month, representing nearly a 50% reduction from his pre-improvement usage, a testament to the power of integrated design. More importantly, Fletcher achieved even temperature distribution throughout his living space, eliminating the hot and cold spots that had plagued his cabin in the past. The sod lining eliminated the cold wall effect that had previously made areas near the cabin's perimeter uncomfortable, creating a more inviting and livable environment. The clay straw chinking stopped the subtle air currents that had carried heat away from the stove area, allowing the warmth to circulate more evenly throughout the cabin. The organized loft space allowed Fletcher to retreat to an efficiently heated sleeping area during the coldest periods while maintaining a comfortable main room for daily activities, providing flexibility and adaptability. Fletcher documented the thermal improvements with the same methodical approach he had applied to testing his buried pipe system, collecting data and analyzing the results. Interior wall temperatures, measured at multiple locations, remained within 5 degrees of each other throughout the coldest nights, a remarkable achievement compared to the previous winter. Previously, he had recorded temperature differentials of 15 to 20 degrees between the warmest and coldest areas of his cabin, highlighting the dramatic improvement in temperature stability. The integrated system of buried pipe air supply and improved envelope performance proved remarkably effective during the severe winter of 1879 to 1880, transforming Fletcher's cabin into a haven of warmth and comfort. When neighbors struggled through January cold snaps that killed livestock and forced families to burn furniture for emergency heat, Fletcher maintained comfortable living conditions while using less fuel than most cabins required during mild weather, a testament to his ingenuity and perseverance. His systematic approach to thermal management had transformed a failing frontier dwelling into a model of cold climate efficiency that would influence cabin construction throughout the Northern Territories for decades to come, leaving a lasting legacy of innovation and resourcefulness. Fletcher's success with air supply and envelope improvements had solved the infiltration problems, a significant step forward in his quest for warmth and comfort. But one critical weakness remained in his heating system, preventing him from achieving true thermal stability. Even with pre-warmed incoming air and superior insulation, his cast-iron stove suffered from the fundamental limitation of all metal heating devices. It released heat quickly when fed and cooled rapidly when the fire died down, creating a cycle of feast and famine. During the coldest nights, Fletcher still woke every 3 hours to stoke the firebox, and by morning, the cabin temperature had dropped 20 degrees despite his envelope improvements, a frustrating reminder that his work was not yet complete. The solution emerged through Fletcher's friendship with Dmitry Koff, a Russian immigrant who had settled in the valley that autumn, bringing with him the traditions and knowledge of his homeland. Koff had grown up in a region where winter temperatures regularly reached -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and fuel wood was scarce enough that families planned heating strategies like military campaigns, conserving every log and maximizing efficiency. His grandfather had been a master mason who specialized in constructing massive heating stoves that burned wood efficiently and retained heat for 12 to 15 hours after the fire died, providing long-lasting warmth with minimal fuel consumption. Koff explained that American settlers typically treated stoves as simple fireboxes designed to burn fuel and radiate heat immediately, a simplistic approach that failed to capture the wood's full potential. Russian builders understood stoves as thermal storage devices that captured and slowly released the energy content of wood over extended periods, maximizing efficiency and minimizing fuel consumption. The key lay in surrounding the firebox with sufficient masonry mass to absorb heat during combustion and radiate it back into the living space long after the flames had died, creating a stable and consistent source of warmth. Fletcher began construction of his thermal mass system in September of 1880, gathering materials throughout the late summer and early fall, preparing for the coming winter. He quarried fieldstone from a granite outcropping 2 miles from his cabin, selecting pieces that ranged from fist size to blocks weighing over 50 pounds, choosing stones that would best suit the project's needs. The stones needed to be dense and free of cracks that might cause them to split when heated and cooled repeatedly, ensuring their durability and longevity. Fletcher also collected several wagon loads of clay-rich soil for mortar and purchased lime from a supplier in Duluth to create mortar that would withstand extreme temperatures, preparing for the challenges ahead. The hearth foundation required excavation beneath Fletcher's existing stove installation, a delicate operation that needed to be executed with care. He removed the stove temporarily and dug a pit 3 feet deep, 4 feet wide, and 6 feet long, extending well beyond the stove's footprint, creating ample space for the massive hearth structure. This foundation was filled with carefully fitted stones laid in lime mortar, creating a solid base that would not shift or settle under the weight of the massive hearth structure, ensuring its stability and longevity. Construction of the thermal mass hearth demanded techniques Fletcher had never attempted, requiring guidance and instruction. Koff guided him through the process of laying stones in courses, with each layer bonded to the next using lime mortar mixed with sand and chopped straw, creating a strong and cohesive structure. The hearth platform measured 6 feet long, 4 feet wide, and rose 18 inches above the cabin floor, providing a spacious and functional surface. The top surface was finished with flat stones fitted so tightly that the joints between them measured less than 1/4 inch, creating a smooth and seamless surface. Above this platform, Fletcher and Koff constructed a fireback wall using the largest stones in their collection, creating a heat-reflective surface behind the stove. This wall rose 4 feet behind where. Here's the translation and rewrite, aiming for a deeply descriptive and expanded narrative. The stove's placement was meticulously planned. It would sit prominently, extending a full 2 feet beyond the firebox on each side, a deliberate choice to maximize radiant heat. Behind it, the fireback, a fortress of stone, was constructed a substantial 18 inches thick. This wasn't mere decoration. It was an exercise in thermal engineering, creating an enormous thermal mass directly behind the firebox to soak up and slowly release the fire's energy. The stones themselves were chosen with care, laid with mortar joints kept deliberately minimal to maximize heat transfer between them. Each stone was fitted with such exacting precision that the wall appeared almost seamless, a testament to craftsmanship elevated to an art form. But the true stroke of genius lay in Koff's modification of the stove's exhaust system, a clever repurposing of what conventional installations simply sent billowing uselessly up the chimney. Koff patiently demonstrated to Fletcher how to construct a series of internal baffles using carefully chosen thin stone slabs and salvaged iron plates, remnants of discarded agricultural equipment. These baffles weren't just randomly placed. They were strategically positioned to force the hot exhaust gases to travel a serpentine, winding path within the masonry mass before they could finally escape up the chimney. This extended journey ensured that a far greater proportion of their heat content was transferred to the surrounding stones, turning the entire structure into a massive thermal battery. Fletcher, ever the meticulous engineer, didn't stop there. He installed precisely calibrated iron dampers at 3 critical points within this modified flue system. These dampers allowed him to exert precise control over the path the exhaust gases took through the thermal mass. During the initial lighting of the fire, he could open bypass dampers, creating a strong, unimpeded draft to quickly establish a roaring blaze and prevent any smoke from backing up and polluting the cabin's interior. Once the fire was burning hot and clean, he could then close these bypasses, forcing the scorching gases to navigate the longer, more tortuous path, maximizing the heat transfer to the masonry. The carefully considered stove placement, combined with these innovations, created a natural convection system that distributed warmth evenly and consistently throughout Fletcher's entire cabin. Cool, crisp air, drawn in through his ingenious buried pipe system, was pulled toward the stove base by the natural draft created when heated air rose towards the loft overhead. As this air flowed around the massive stone hearth, it absorbed the stored heat, rising to gently warm the loft area before gradually cooling and descending along the exterior walls, completing the elegant circulation pattern. It was a self-regulating system, a testament to thoughtful design. Fletcher's first true test of this complete thermal storage system came with a sharp bite of a November cold snap, when temperatures unexpectedly plummeted to a frigid -15 degrees Fahrenheit. He built a robust fire in the modified stove at 6 o'clock in the evening, feeding it diligently for 3 hours until the stone hearth and the fireback wall were thoroughly, deeply heated. By 9 p.m., the stone surfaces were radiating heat, almost too hot to touch comfortably, a clear indication that they had absorbed and were now storing a substantial amount of thermal energy. Fletcher allowed the fire to burn down completely, the embers slowly fading, and began measuring the cabin's temperature at regular hourly intervals throughout the long, dark night. At midnight, a full 3 hours after the last flames had flickered and died, the interior temperature had dropped a mere 5 degrees from its peak. By morning, a full 12 hours after he had stopped feeding the stove, the cabin remained a comfortable 15 degrees warmer than the outside temperature, and the stone hearth was still noticeably warm to the touch, a comforting presence against the frigid air. The gains in fuel efficiency proved even more dramatic than Fletcher had initially dared to hope. During December of 1880, his first full month operating the thermal storage system, he burned an average of just over 2.5 cords of split hardwood, a remarkable reduction of nearly 50% compared to his previous winter's consumption, even with the improved building envelope he had previously implemented. More significantly, Fletcher discovered he could maintain consistently comfortable interior temperatures by building just one substantial fire each evening, eliminating the exhausting, bone-chilling routine of nighttime stoking that had plagued his previous winters. The thermal mass system also provided unparalleled temperature stability, especially during the most severe weather events. When a particularly vicious January storm brought temperatures crashing down to -38 degrees Fahrenheit, accompanied by sustained winds exceeding 30 miles per hour, Fletcher's cabin interior never dropped below a comfortable 55 degrees, despite the fact that he was only building one fire per day. The massive stone hearth absorbed heat during the evening firing and then released it slowly and steadily throughout the following 24 hours, effectively moderating temperature swings that would have made the cabin utterly uninhabitable with a conventional heating system. Fletcher documented these remarkable results with the same meticulous precision he had applied to testing his earlier innovations. Daily wood consumption averaged just over 3/4 of a cord during the coldest months, while interior temperatures remained within a remarkably stable 10-degree range. Regardless of the punishing external conditions, the thermal storage system had utterly transformed his heating regime from a constant, exhausting battle against the unrelenting cold into a manageable, predictable daily routine that provided reliable comfort with minimal fuel consumption. The synergistic integration of thermal mass with Fletcher's buried air system and envelope improvements had created a heating solution that far exceeded the performance of any conventional frontier cabin. Visitors who experienced the palpable warmth and comfort of Fletcher's interior during the brutal winter weather could no longer dismiss his methods as unnecessary or overly complicated. Word of his innovations spread rapidly throughout the territory, carried by travelers who had witnessed firsthand the dramatic difference that systematic thermal management could make in the face of cold climate survival. The ultimate, undeniable test of Fletcher's integrated heating system came during the particularly harsh winter of 1881, when a massive Arctic storm system descended upon the Northern Territories, settling in and refusing to budge for nearly 2 weeks. The blizzard struck with ferocious intensity on January 15th, bringing winds exceeding 40 miles per hour and temperatures that plummeted to a bone-chilling -42 degrees Fahrenheit. Unlike typical winter storms that might last for a day or two, this system stubbornly maintained its grip on the region with relentless ferocity, pushing every heating system to its absolute breaking point. Fletcher faced this crisis with a systematic, carefully planned preparation that conventional settlers had simply never considered necessary. In early January, well before the storm's arrival, he had meticulously inspected every single component of his heating system, performing preventative maintenance tasks that would have been utterly impossible once the brutal weather set in. He cleared any accumulated debris from his buried pipe intake, carefully checked the clay joints for any cracking that might allow precious warm air to leak out, and tested his stove dampers to ensure they operated smoothly and reliably under the stress of extreme temperature differentials. Most critically, Fletcher had developed a comprehensive fuel management strategy, informed by 2 years of meticulous observation and experimentation with his thermal mass system. He calculated that the storm would require him to maintain one substantial fire per day for the full 14 days, consuming approximately 10 cords of split hardwood in total. He had diligently prepared this precise quantity well in advance, splitting the wood into uniform pieces sized specifically for his modified stove and storing it in a shed attached directly to his cabin. This eliminated the need for any dangerous, potentially life-threatening trips to an outdoor woodpile during the height of the storm. When the blizzard finally struck with its full, terrifying force, Fletcher's neighbors found themselves engaged in a losing battle against conditions that utterly overwhelmed conventional heating methods. The Olson family, who resided in a standard log cabin with traditional mud chinking, burned through their entire monthly wood supply within the first 5 days of the storm, facing the grim prospect of running out completely. Samuel Wright, the local carpenter who had previously mocked Fletcher's innovations as eccentric and unnecessary, was eventually forced to burn furniture and sections of his interior wall boards in a desperate attempt to maintain barely survivable temperatures inside his cabin. The McCready brothers, whose supposedly superior cabin construction had been the pride of the valley, discovered to their dismay that their expensive Chicago stove simply could not overcome the massive thermal losses of their poorly insulated building envelope. They maintained fires around the clock, burning wood as fast as they could split it, yet their interior temperatures still plummeted to near freezing during the worst nights. By the storm's second week, they had completely exhausted their fuel supply and were forced to temporarily abandon their cabin, seeking refuge with relatives some 20 miles to the south. Fletcher's integrated system, in stark contrast, performed with remarkable stability and resilience throughout the entire crisis. His buried pipe continued to deliver pre-warmed air at a consistent 38 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, even when surface temperatures reached their absolute lowest points. The carefully applied clay straw chinking and interior sod lining effectively prevented heat loss that would have otherwise rendered the cabin uninhabitable, while his thermal mass hearth stored and steadily released heat with a predictable, almost mechanical precision that required no nighttime attention whatsoever. During the storm's most severe phase, when howling winds created near-zero visibility ground blizzard conditions that made outdoor movement potentially deadly, Fletcher diligently documented his cabin's performance with meticulous attention to detail. Interior temperatures remained consistently between 58 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the entire 14-day period, varying only slightly with the predictable daily cycle of evening heating and gradual overnight cooling. His single daily fire, built each evening at 6 o'clock and maintained for 3 hours, provided comfortable warmth until the following evening. The fuel efficiency of Fletcher's complete system proved nothing short of extraordinary under these extreme conditions. He consumed precisely 9 3/4 cords of wood during the entire 2-week storm, significantly less than many conventional cabins burned during a typical week of normal winter weather. More importantly, Fletcher never felt the need to build emergency fires or wake during the night to stoke his stove, maintaining his normal sleep schedule throughout the entire crisis. While his neighbors suffered from exhaustion caused by the constant, demanding fire tending, Fletcher's system demonstrated a crucial advantage that no single component could have provided alone: thermal resilience created by the synergistic interaction of all the improvements working in harmony. The buried pipe prevented cold shock to his heating system, the envelope improvements retained the heat his stove produced, and the thermal mass smoothed out temperature variations that would have otherwise created uncomfortable living conditions and resulted in excessive fuel consumption. During the storm's final days, Fletcher made a subtle but important observation that would influence his future modifications to the system. He noticed that the thermal mass hearth had developed a temperature gradient, with the stones closest to the firebox remaining significantly warmer than those located at the outer edges. This observation led him to experiment with the strategic placement of iron plates within the masonry to improve heat distribution throughout the thermal mass, a refinement that would ultimately increase the system's overall heat storage capacity by an estimated 15%. When the storm finally broke on January 29th, the stark contrast between Fletcher's situation and that of his neighbors became undeniably clear. Fletcher emerged from the crisis with adequate fuel supplies remaining and his cabin in perfect condition, ready to continue normal winter operations without any need for emergency measures. His neighbors, however, faced weeks of arduous recovery work, repairing damage caused by overheating their stoves, replacing furniture they had burned for fuel, and scrambling desperately to replenish their depleted wood supplies. The aftermath of the 1881 storm marked the beginning of a quiet but steady adoption of Fletcher's techniques throughout the Northern Territories. Eric Anderson, the Norwegian immigrant who had previously endorsed Fletcher's methods, began construction of his own buried pipe system that very spring. 2 other families in the valley requested Fletcher's assistance in improving their cabin chinking using the clay straw mixture Klaus Baer had taught him. More significantly, traveling merchants and territorial officials who had experienced the comfort of Fletcher's cabin during the storm carried detailed descriptions of his innovations to other settlements. Letters describing the buried pipe system and thermal mass heating began appearing in territorial newspapers and settlers' guidebooks published in St. Paul and Minneapolis. These accounts emphasized the practical benefits rather than obscure theoretical principles, focusing on measurable fuel savings and improved living conditions that appealed directly to cost-conscious homesteaders. Fletcher's innovations also attracted attention from some unexpected sources. A timber company supervisor who had stayed overnight in Fletcher's cabin during the storm was so impressed with the heating efficiency that he arranged for company carpenters to study the thermal mass construction techniques. Within 2 years, several logging camps had incorporated modified versions of Fletcher's hearth design into their bunkhouses, achieving significant fuel savings and noticeably improved worker comfort during extended winter operations. The legacy of Fletcher's systematic approach to cold climate heating extended far beyond the mere adoption of individual techniques. His methodology, identifying specific thermal problems, researching traditional solutions, testing modifications systematically, and documenting results precisely, established a powerful model for practical innovation that deeply influenced frontier building practices. Throughout the late 19th century, settlers gradually learned that combining old-world knowledge with careful experimentation could produce dramatically superior results compared to simply copying standard frontier practices without truly understanding their inherent limitations or potential for improvement. That's how progress was made.